Hace su ingreso el señor José Manuel Salazar.
Mr. Jose Manuel Salazar, Executive Secretary of the United Nations for the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, comes in accompanied by Aloizio Mercadante, President of the Brazilian National Bank for Economic and Social Development. We would like to greet those who are with us in person in this ECLAC room, Raúl Previche, and also those that are participating in the virtual platforms. We will especially like to welcome the authorities from the government of Chile, the host country, and also those member countries from ECLAC and members of the United Nations, as well as of the diplomatic delegations. Also, the colleagues from the United Nations agencies, funds and programs, civil society organizations, the business sector, the academia, ECLAC staff, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we have the presence of Aloizio Mercadante, President of the National Bank for Economic and Social Development of Brazil, who will deliver a lecture within this framework of the 75th anniversary of ECLAC. The lecture is entitled The Role of Development Banking in the Transformation of the Latin American Development Model. But following, we will hear the words of Jose Manuel Salazar Chirinax, Executive Secretary of ECLAC. Welcome, everybody, those that are here in person, but those that are connected online too. I would like to give a special greeting to the authorities of the government in Chile, also the representatives of the diplomatic delegations in Chile, in particular, the ambassador of Brazil in Chile, Pablo Pacheco. Also, representatives of the United Nations systems, colleagues from ECLAC, dear friends. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this third anniversary lecture celebrating ECLAC's 75th anniversary. This is a cycle of conferences which has a twofold objectives: to celebrate the great contributions of the past, but also to reflect on the current and future challenges for the region and for ECLAC. Until February 2024, we will have the opportunity to hear the different perspectives from very distinguished speakers, leading economists and thinkers of the Latin American and the Caribbean development in order to foster dialogue and renewed thinking on the coming years for the region and for the organization too. It is, for me, as the Executive Secretary of ECLAC, a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome today to Mr. Aloizio Mercadante, President of the National Bank for Economic and Social Development of Brazil, BNDES. Dear Mr. Mercadante, we would like to thank you so much for being with us today in order to give us your vision and perspective for the development of Brazil and the region. We are very excited with your participation in this activity at ECLAC, an institution that in many ways has been shaped and inspired by the contributions of illustrious economists with extensive experience and leadership at the head of the bank, especially Mr. Celso Furtado, who this year would have turned 103 years old, was one of the founders of what is known as the ECLACian thinking on the development for Latin America and the Caribbean, and was also a member of the bank as a staff director in the 50s. One of the things that I would like to highlight is that we have the pleasure this morning of having amongst us Sofia, who is Mr. Celso Hurtado's granddaughter. Thank you so much for being with us today. It is important to remember that ECLAC and the bank have had a long-standing and foundational relationship on a joint study group which operated from 1953 to 1955, which was the framework from which ECLAC established its formal representation in Brazil. The group was chaired by Celso Furtado, and one of its main results was the development of a study on the Brazilian economy, which would be the basis for the Brazilian President Juscelino Kubitschek's goal plan. Beyond the contribution of the bank and ECLAC, the relationship to the formulation of important development policies in Brazil, this relationship also contributed to the formation of ideas and concepts that have framed a way of thinking, evaluating, and proposing development policies. And many of those elements are still valid in our region currently. So this morning, on the occasion of the visit of the president of the bank to ECLAC, we're very pleased to formalize the creation of a working group, which we have called Celso Furtado, which recovers 70 years of a historical framework of action and initiatives for the economic development under the new challenges and complexities presented by the 21st century in order to create a more productive, inclusive, and sustainable future. Today's keynote lecture on the role of the development banking in the transformation of Latin American development model includes a fundamental theme, both for the long-term issues as for the urgent construction of new styles of development, as well as for the urgencies of the current situation that follows serious financial and fiscal restrictions and the corresponding debates on the reform of the international financial architecture. All of these are key issues for the region, for ECLAC, and for the United Nations.
Brazil and the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean are at a crossroads. Despite the country's enormous potential, growth rates over the last decade have been very low, creating an environment in which structural development gaps tend to worsen. Low economic dynamism, coupled to high levels of poverty and informality, as well as social inequality and continued environmental degradation, are structural aspects of the development model that we urgently need to transform. And by the way, precisely tomorrow, we are launching the economic study for this year, 2023, on precisely all of these topics. And also, we need to face these challenges in an era of great change, technological change, demographic change, climate, geopolitical, and geoeconomic, all of which means that this is also an era of uncertainty, which makes governance challenges far more complex. But these are also times of great opportunities, such as the transition to green economies, the promotion of the driving sectors needed for productive transformation, and to get out of the low-growth trap and the precision social policies made possible by new digital and AI technologies. The big push that we need to make on multiple fronts, productive, social, environmental, digital, educational, and in terms of the care society, to transform our development models requires scaling up financing. And few institutions in the world have as much experience in this area as Brazil's National Bank for Economic and Social Development. The development banking is called upon to play a key role in financing the transformations of our development models and respective structural changes. Without massive investment, there is no structural change towards a more productive, inclusive, and sustainable development model that we all aspire to, nor transitions to accelerate the pace towards the sustainable development goals. So allow me now to introduce today's distinguished speaker. Prior to his current role as president of the BNDES, Aloizio Mercadante, he's had a distinguished academic, professional, and political career in various positions in both Brazil and the region. He holds a degree in economics from the Faculty of Economics and Administration of the University of São Paulo, where he graduated as an economist in 1976. In 1989, he obtained his master's degree in economic science at the State University of Campinas, Unicamp, and in 2010, he obtained his PhD in economic theory from the same university with a thesis entitled As Bases do Novo Desenvolvimentismo do Brasil, Análise do Governo Lula. His political career is marked by his influence on economic debate and policies in Brazil. He participated in the founding of the Workers' Party in 1980, where he acted as vice president and director of international relations of the National Executive Committee. He also participated in the founding of the Central Única dos Trabalhadores, CUT, in 1984, where he was the first director of the Department of Social, Economic, and Political Studies. He's also served 2 terms as a federal deputy and was chairman of the Economy Committee. He was vice presidential candidate together with presidential candidate Luis Inácio Lula da Silva in 1994, and he was elected Senator of the Republic in 2003 through 2011, and as a senator, among other roles, Mr. Mercadante chaired the Economic Affairs Committee. He was Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation, Minister of Education, and Minister Head of the Civil House of the Presidency of the Republic on different occasions. And before being invited by President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva to become president of BNDES, he acted as president of the Perseu Abramo Foundation, a think tank and political foundation of the Workers' Party. He also acted in the coordination of the political campaign and formulation of the government program of the president-elect Lula da Silva. Since February this year, 2023, Mr. Mercadante has been the 39th president of the BNDES, with the challenge of leading the largest development bank in Brazil and Latin America and the Caribbean, under a new vision for the transformation of development model, which he will talk to us about in a few minutes. It is so with great institutional and personal gratitude that it is for me a pleasure to invite Mr. Aloizio Mercadante to give his keynote presentation to commemorate ECLAC's 75th university. Thank you.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize because since I'm getting very old, I speak slowly, but I would like to greet Mr. José Manuel Salazar Ginax, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, and also thank him for the invitation and for organizing this partnership. And also, I'd like to greet the authorities of the government of Chile and other countries' ambassadors and representatives of the diplomatic corps, representatives of other international agencies and representatives of civil society organizations, business representatives and academic ones. And I would like to greet Stephanie Pirigiones, who is able to combine what is improbable. A member of the Council of the Central Bank always accompanied the Zeppelin or ECLAC thought and economy, and another aspect, which is a very remarkable combination. Also, Mr. Ominami, our friend, minister and senator, I thank you for your presence. And also the Mr. Carlos Musi, who did a great job with ECLAC in Brazil, an economist of ECLAC, and also Mr. Sofia Furtado, who is the granddaughter of Celso Furtado, who is here working and to follow a grandfather in the academic sector and with to further develop the what was founded by her grandfather. I would like to speak not of the distance between Brazil and here, but the political commitment to this effort, this way of thinking in Latin America. ECLAC has always been a center of reference, a benchmark of development, structural, innovative, that combines economic development that combats inequality in our continent. ECLAC, in addition to that, has had another relevant role as secretary. He has been marked with solidarity, because today the political instability, dictatorships were recurrent in Latin America, and ECLAC did allow many researchers, thinkers could be here studying all of these very difficult times. And so I would also like to greet Lisa Bramo, Alvaro Diaz, who was ambassador of Chile to Brazil, and some we have lost recently, but we've had great years of coexistence, and of course, they've contributed to the relationship between Brazil and ECLAC. I'm very pleased that this working commission between Brazil and ECLAC is being formed today. Celso Furtado chaired the commission, and the BNDES has been for 71 years history. ECLAC has 75, so it is a similar historical scenario when they were born. And as was said, he took part in the BNDES, formulating government programs and also in the construction of the target plan Juscelino Kubitschek in 1955. And this was a development plan that drove forward the heavy industrialization in Brazil, brought the motor industry to the country, promoted infrastructure, set a series of things that led to our economic industrial growth, and Brazil too accompanied this thought of ECLAC. And I would like to pay tribute to Celso Furtado for his presence through his granddaughter, for her to know that this is very meaningful for me. And at the end of the day, I will quote the last letter sent to me 20 years back. We have a historical window of opportunities for Latin America. As of the moment that Latin America evolved and moved ahead, there were major international changes and crises. Brazil was began with the crisis of 29, and imports and exports began. At the time, all of these moments of imports are moments that we should reflect upon and think and reposition Latin America in the international scenario. We are in the face of a major geopolitical change, a polarization between the East and the West, the US and China. And I think that Latin America, in view of this, needs to follow actively, looking for a multipolar world and avoiding or leaving out no efforts to have a new situation in Latin America. We need to build bridges, look for interaction among countries of the global south, and same as we have done under the government of President Lula, simply extending these bridges. And in view of this new geopolitical scenario and the changes in technology and a 4.0 technology industry, there is space for Latin America to reposition itself. We are perhaps living through a displacement of value chains based on the Second World War, maybe the most relevant one today. And it is important to take a look at the economy in Latin America. There are sources of inspiration. Yes, we are seeing a sort of plan using the industrial policy, and several Latin American thinkers have focused on this. And using market protectionism, subsidies, we are speaking of close to $393 billion used microprocessors, semiconductors, and also another $70 billion. And this relationship, an American state has subsidized and established partnerships in the market and attracting businesses to achieve the industrial pace is the outcome of what we are seeing, of what was done. There is a very important economic activity and also in the productive base in the US. And it's not that different when we take a look at the EU with the generation of 106 billion euros in instruments that the EU is conducting, for example, with the green hydrogen dispute and also interest rates at zero. There are subsidies, there is state, there are industrializing policies, and there are sciences and technologies. And we cannot continue to be prisoners of a neoliberal orthodox view and with a minimum state.
This is we have seen in the growth of Asia, and also how we can have this current political reconfiguration with a more active economic policy, like Jack Sullivan says when he mentions the fact that the United States has opted for a clear choice to reorient or refocus this whole value chain, bringing it back to the United States. And this is why I believe that this redesign is something that must be considered again within the Latin American agenda. Because if we are divided, we shall be weaker. But if we are united, we will have a larger diplomatic presence and we will become more powerful. Yet this integration agenda has got to be reviewed. We have to integrate the value chains in the region, the partnerships between companies. We need to also make more robust the infrastructure in order to have a better trade relationships in the region, seeking new finance instruments in order to bring more investment. The Mercosur project, as ECLAC, UNASUR, have taken too long in these last few years. It is therefore necessary to go back to them, to recreate instruments like CCR, trying to find new regional trade through currency and monetary mechanisms that will allow for the promotion of trade between the different blocs, as was the case with Mercosur. The other topic that I would like to address here is that I totally agree with the United Nations General Secretary. That is to say, we are facing a climate crisis. And the goal of the Paris summit, which is to reach a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius. I mean, we know that global warming is very close to this goal, yet July was the hottest month in the whole world in history. And the forecast states that the coming 5 years will most likely be the hottest in history. So just like this forecast, we will have more than 1.5 degrees of world warming, which means that this is not only about a technology forecast with figures. That is to say, we have an impact from global warming, which can be seen in the flora and fauna. Animals are suffering due to genetic mutations. We have to also consider the type of feed that, or the type of food that will overcome this situation. In Canada, in Hawaii, we can see fires and the floods, and also the situation of the drought in Argentina, the drought in Uruguay. We can see this happening everywhere. Just here, look at the glaciers. I mean, right now, in the winter, we've had days with 14 degrees Celsius, as was the case of Europe. The desert in Arizona, 43 degrees Celsius. So this climate crisis is massive. And in fact, the Global South does play an important role in changing the situation and to better address climate change. the promise of the most developed countries in investment is something that simply has not materialized. And it is true that we all suffered the pandemic, and now we have a war with $170 billion committed in weapons. Yet, the climate crisis has not been well addressed. The warnings that we have been given, we've done nothing about. And we will have the COP soon. And then in 2030, the COP will take place in Brazil, and we will be chairing also the G20. President Lula will be chairing the G20 group, and there we will have important spaces where we will be able to have important mechanisms at our hands reach in order to be more courageous in trying to achieve these goals. Let me talk about Brazil. Brazil has one of the worst relationships between the GDP and gas emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, we do have problems with the deforestation. 24% has an inappropriate use of the land. And we do have a power matrix, which is 43% clean energies, yet in G20 is 11%, and the grid is made up of 17% or now even 90% the green energies due to the reserves. We have a hydroelectric, wind, and solar matrix, which is increasing. Now, we in Brazil should be the first country in G20 achieving zero emissions. And for this, we do require a very solid program. And this is taking place under our administration. We have important deforestation, and it is on the increase too. But we are fighting against it, but that is simply not enough. The nation has 25% of the tropical forests in the country. We have the largest diversity of fauna too. We have a lot of land still available for reforestation, and we have to make an important effort in planting back trees in order to try and mitigate deforestation. We have to protect our forests. It's not just about fighting against deforestation. We have to go back to planting, especially in the south of the Amazon, where we do have different types of harvest, like, for example, soybeans. And at the bank, at the BNDES, we are working together with a proposal from the government, and we expect to be able to plant 6 million new trees before 2030, with a cost of $10 billion. $10 billion. But 4 million hectares are public land, which are under conservation. So we can have a quicker reforestation there. Where we have family agriculture or private property, we do require more resources in order to pay for the environmental services that have been offered. We cannot take the people's private land and to plant there. Simply with the Amazon's reforestation, we can decrease the temperature in the world in 1 degree Celsius, but we do have to look at the hydrological services too. And in the case of Brazil, well, we cannot do these alone. We require alliances and partnerships. We do need the countries that have more financial resources to help us, because it's a systems impact for the world. And the Amazon is one of the instruments that we can use together with Congo and Indonesia. We have important tropical forests, and with those, we can expect to get to 24 million hectares for the reforesting, regeneration, and reclamation of forest and flora. So with these countries, we should also be able to have 50 million hectares with important amounts of emissions being addressed. That is to say, the crisis can be addressed, but we do need to be more ambitious. And remember that there is a green barrier that was to contain the desertification of the Sahara. Several measures are being implemented, but they are isolated around the world. And the G20 must prioritize, organize, and fund. The G20 must understand the urgency of this whole agenda. It is not enough to simply give nice speeches. We require actions for emergencies, especially with that is the most expensive and more urgent, so that we can address this climatic crisis. We can see, for example, that the Amazon can make an important contribution. And the reforestation, carbon sequestration can allow us to have zero emissions between the G20 countries. This perspective that I'm talking about is not to replace, but rather to supplement what we must do regarding the ecological transformation of our economy, energy transition, decarbonization of the industry, of agriculture. These are all musts. Nonetheless, the pace and the necessary resources are too slow. And that's what this is all about, really. The transportation industry has been using fossil fuels for over 1 century. We talk about e-mobility, and that will be replacing current cars, yet the main structure will continue because, for example, planes still use fossil fuels, also sea vessels, and the replacement is very slow, takes time, which means then that it'll not fully change in terms of the climate crisis. The same thing with the power matrix, green hydrogen, solar, wind energy, all of that is important and necessary, but initiatives need to be bolder than this in order to really start changing this negative scenario. Now, we have seen the role that public banks play. We have 500 of them, $3.7 trillion, and 10% of the investment is coordinated by these public banks. So with this historical scenario where the energy transition and the ecological transition implies a larger cost, then the states play an important role in order to bring private resources, private investments, and public banks play an important role in the coordination of this whole process. We launched a meeting for the preparation of the following of the next COP by updating the public banks in the region, the IDB, the BNDES, CAF. We've all launched a program with a joint coordinated effort for strategic investment. We started with micro and small and medium-sized enterprises under the COP, under the COP. But these initiatives shows that similar kind of initiatives must be developed in the region, and we must think in order to suggest further partnerships like ECLAC and public banks. I would like to call the attention to Chile, which is a country that has extraordinary lithium deposits and has also identified the potential of green hydrogen. And our challenge in this region is not to replace the commodities that we currently mine. But and in fact, we should continue exporting those commodities, like it's the case of Brazil, which exports important commodities. It's an important agricultural producer, iron ore, soybean, wheat. But we must go one step beyond. We must create value added. We must industrialize. We must look at the future exporting sector and rethink what our region should be. Brazil is already producing lithium-based batteries. Why not a joint effort with Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Brazil that have important lithium deposits in order to put together these new lithium batteries, but not only exporting the raw materials. We must also look for the sustainable pathway, because Brazil is the second country where people used the most public transportation, only second to India.
Today, buses are arriving from China with financing that is generous. And if we do not understand that we need to reindustrialize the region, and this could not only Brazil, for example, Chile producing batteries, Brazil making buses, and other countries in the region producing other things, we can integrate the production chain and stimulate demand in order to substitute the diesel buses for electric ones and do it locally, associating the countries that can make this change in order to reindustrialize, to produce parts and industry. In the case of the buses, there's a lot of labor, a lot of manufacturing, different to electrical vehicles that today is very automated. And so we have 5 plants. Well, we do not have buses, electrical buses in Brazil that were not made there. And we're going to start delivering them this year. And we need the batteries, and that we need to work with ECLAC, and they can help us to shape working groups to have the best leasing models, because otherwise the operators do not have the resources, and this could be an exemplary case on doing things together. We had, during the pandemic, we saw the vulnerabilities, and this is the key issue, sovereignty and security. So we need investments and the commercial deficit that we have. Now, in health, for example, we need a lot of research and innovation. And we need to substitute imports. We need investment, innovation. And also here, it strikes us, the countries of the region explicitly have a regional integration, and we could do far more together than what we can do separately. And then in relation to the BNDES, another decisive area is the digital transformation of the economy, the new industrialization. We have a fund for universalization of the telecom services. And today we need bandwidth for all schools in Brazil. And 98,000 are soon to have fiber, and 10 or 15 kilometers of fiber. And in the Amazon area, remote areas, they are connected by satellite. And this is essential to have quality education to transform the young people, and especially after the experience of the pandemic. The hybrid school that is going to half digital and half in person. We need the in-person part, because the coexistence and experience relations to others, but we need to have the digital side as well. We're also SMEs. These are very competitive. We have thousands in Brazil. They need digital technology. We need to encourage productivity to be more efficient. And the digital transformation is another project. And USA is doing this with microprocessors. And we could produce more games, more software, and move ahead in that agenda as well. I find that public banks and ECLAC need to sit down and discuss the big techs. the concentration of revenues and resources, and it is possible to have fiscal revenues, and this could empty the region. Netflix, Prime, and others, the industry of the creative economy industry. And we need to have a national identity here. It affects us. You see countries such as Korea, that they've had an extraordinary transformation. We can do something like that. We can do it. We have history, literature, to have a greater presence at an audiovisual level. We see other countries are regulated, like the EU. They're attracting investments, and we are just used as consumers in these platforms. So that is something to address, and ECLAC could suggest proposals and policies and foster that the big tech innovation, so that all issues related to real estate, Airbnb and others, that has a major impact on the industry and all the garment industry as well. And this is very important for a new economic global regulation, and we need to be there and address that agenda in an efficient manner, and taking a look at what other countries are also doing. And this region has great potential. We have more sun, more wind, and the ability to produce renewable energy. Now, are we going to produce just to export green hydrogen, or are we going to have sectors that are energy intensive? And say, for example, in Europe, and that they're not able to manage these sectors, and there is a loss of competitiveness. That distancing between the industry and the energy source today, green hydrogen. Brazil is also betting in favor of green hydrogen, Chile as well, and the lithium. We need to integrate these production chains and build things together, attract investment, and try to have exporting sectors of the future in a far more organized manner. And here too, I see that ECLAC could play a very relevant role in this construction. And we are building some new financial instruments. The public banks have done it. We have the Amazonia Fund, which is non-reimbursable, which is to protect the Amazon. And it is very relevant, but it is insufficient because the challenge is great. We also have the Climate Fund. This is another fund that we are issuing bonds done by the Ministry of Finance, and with very low rates, to encourage the energy transition, environmental transition, and so attract investment and move ahead with this challenge, the decisive challenge that we have ahead. So I also wanted to mention, I have another issue for ECLAC, but something that I will never return to in my life. When I began as a military man, during the military regime. And today, I saw many colleagues disappear, and I thought that my grandchildren today would never see a coup. But I hope they do not need to live through a dictatorship. We need to maintain the democratic rule of law, understand that this is not a liberal regime. It's not just freedom of expression, the independence of powers, and the sovereignty of the vote. This is a regime that is so flexible, generous, that even those that deny democracy express their denial democratically. There are figures in Brazil that are not at all committed to the democratic state, and also in other countries of the region. But democracy is also a social organization to bargain and incorporate rights. The moment that you withdraw these rights from the population, this becomes more fragile. And so the power of the digital communication, we're seeing with that a polarization. And so the historical issue of ECLAC to combat inequality and having more generous economic policies or social policies that are more comprehensive, we're making an effort, a giant effort in that area. for the reconstruction of Brazil, and that is valid for the entire region. Systematize these experiences to share the best good practices in policies and social aspects, because it is important for people to be able to stabilize democracy, which continues to be a common good that is essential for our relationship and for this house throughout history. So I would like to end and speak now Brazil Dutch. Brazil has been very polarized. We have an unprecedented misuse of the electoral machinery by the previous government. It was a very hard dispute. I took part in the coordination of 9 presidential campaigns, and we had disputes, historical disputes, major ones. But the debate is, and the day after, you say who won the opposition, the government, and we've lost some, we won some, and that is democracy, recognizing the vote. We have political forces that no longer recognize the results of the polls. You saw what happened in January the 8th with an attempted coup. We came out again. We interrupted that process. All the main leaderships were jailed and with due process. And once again, the stability was reinstated, and the government is still very attentive to the challenge. But from the economic viewpoint, we are experiencing a new macroeconomic atmosphere. We are 3% below the EU and the US. We have a new fund to ensure against a poor trend of the economy. And we need a fiscal policy to have a counter-cyclical actions. At the time, we passed a law to have a fiscal space to see us through that stage. And throughout the opposition, after the coup attempted by Bolsonaro, we have several working groups to monitor the different areas of government. And in this transition, we had 36 groups working with each minister. When they came into office, received a diagnosis, first measures, the most relevant proposals. And so the government began very quickly to coordinate all this and preparing the transition, and ended up the fiscal side to back it. You need the fiscal space and also have the new perspective to stabilize the public agenda. And we also made an important tax reform, reducing the red tape, and we still have to see some chapters on personal income tax, which is particularly difficult in our societies. In Latin America, continues to be one of the most unequal regions in the planet. And it is a very tough dispute in Parliament. We were able to improve the country rating after 18 years. And so the fifth best fiscal outcome of G20 countries, and we beat records with the balance of payments this year, the commercial balance of payments. We have reserves, and GDP now has a positive change. The pessimists, well, so we had foreseen a 3% growth of GDP, but take a look at what happened. We had for one semester, 3%. Now, the second semester is a major challenge to increase investment. And so then once again, I return to the public banks. We've increased by 31% the payout in the first semester, 102% increase in the demands for loans. And we need to capitalize everything and have partnerships in the private sector. Public banks have more patience. They are able to attract the privates, use this for infrastructure, industrial policies, and they're essential for people to come out of this inertia and resume the process for the reindustrialization infrastructure for the future. We have three policies that are the pillars of the government's economic policy: a new political industrial policy, areas of priority to be the exporters of the future, speeding up the growth with a $35 billion over 4 years in infrastructure for the countries, in partnership with all states and municipalities, with a clear horizon in terms of priorities and investment in mobility, railways, schools, hospitals as well, and also social structures, and everything together, urban mobility. And a third pillar, which is ecological transformation or transition. So all of these initiatives of a green economy, decarbonized, and industry, agriculture services, which is a major historical effort that we want to try and do and move ahead.
Brasil vive novo momento.
So Brazil is going through a new moment, which is quite positive. But this only makes sense if this is shared with other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I would like to give my closing remarks. And by the way, Sophia, I will give you the letter that I got from your grandfather in 2012. He said that it was very difficult, but still that it was possible to change Brazil, building a more generous and solidarity economy. And that's what we have been able to do. So Celso Furtado chaired this commission that we are recreating 70 years later. That has an important underlying meaning here at ECLAC, where we have had generations of huge intellectuals that have thought the world from here with creativity, innovation, but always standing upright, thinking that we could develop a better world with international relationships, building a more generous and continent. And I believe that it's time for Latin America and the region to be more courageous. And ECLAC can contribute with this project, and we're going to rebuild, we're going to enhance this big training center for state management. And these are people that have important specific knowledge, but not often have the right training. And when looking at the economic education in Brazil, Celso Furtado, Maria Tavares, who has been my advisor, she was an advisor of mine when I was in Senate, and I helped her in her thesis. Antonio Castro, his daughter coordinates the seminars at the bank. Carlos Lessa also, who was the president. And there is a whole set of thinkers, Brevich and other intellectual characters at ECLAC. So we can work together, and with a lot of effort, we can really enhance and strengthen ECLAC. Brazil needs the help of ECLAC, and ECLAC needs the help of Brazil. And I know that speaking Portuguese, or rather my Portuguese, can be a little bit complicated for you. But even so, the ECLAC documents is not always translated into Portuguese, yet we are more than 50% of the population in South America. And Brazil will always be here helping. We will walk through this bridge together. We will build that together. And it is a wonderful window of opportunities as long as we have clarity and we are brave enough to bring this region to a union. Thank you so much for paying attention to me.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Aloizio Mercadante, President of the Brazilian National Bank for Economic and Social Development, for this conference. And now, just as we had mentioned before, Mr. Mercadante will be available to answer questions from the floor, but also from those that are connected online. So we will have a segment here with Mr. Salazar, who is the Executive Secretary. Please don't forget that you can scan the QR code that we have on the display, and using that, you can ask questions by giving us your name and then writing the question. So we will give you just a couple of minutes for you to get connected and to ask your questions. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this extraordinary conference with an important historical background, with important commitments towards Latin America. And obviously, there is a great friendship between Brazil and ECLAC that is based on that collaborations from the onset of both institutions. A lot of material to reflect has been provided to us. I would like to highlight a couple of things from the presentation that we have just heard. One is that the type of economy, when we talk about economy, well, there's always that economy that comes from the textbooks, an abstract economy, where there is a belief that if we set certain rules and we let things develop themselves, miracles can happen. But at ECLAC, we know very well that that tradition that Mr. Mercadante mentioned, that things do not spontaneously or automatically actually happen. We must guide things, we must focus, we must work hard in order to try to achieve them. There has to be collaboration between public and private sector. There has to be institutional quality, but also the appropriate political conditions. So it was very interesting to hear his reflections on the importance of democracy and the history of Latin America with so many events where we have drifted away from the democratic pathway. So we have many things in common, and I'm very happy then that we are here, that we have agreed to launch this Celso Furtado working group in order to renew the collaboration and to do things together between the bank and ECLAC. Because I believe that we share this vision for these concrete economics with very concrete challenges, but that also dares to place bets in certain sectors. He's talked to us about climate crisis, energy transition, e-mobility, and all of the things that can be done with lithium, the industrialization of lithium by putting together batteries and adding value, and digital transformation and green hydrogen, and so many other things. And that's precisely the tone of the conversation. If Latin America was actually more focused and doing more on these things, as we would say, it would be a totally different kettle of fish. So we would really promote growth, we would have more economic interaction. This is just a simple reflection, but I'm here to give you some space to ask the questions so that we can really get the benefits from the knowledge from Mr. Mercadante. Let me start by asking a couple of questions so that we can delve deeper into some of the topics. I mean, the main topic is the role of multilateral and regional banks that he has already talked about, which is key for the funding of the climate situation. But with the exception of some of the national banks, and precisely the BNDES is one of those, what we see is that national banks are not really playing an important role in funding against climate change. So how can we have a better coordination and cooperation between multilateral national banks for these important momentum? Because the gap is simply huge. And the pace that we are at, unless we have this important push from behind, which requires important funding, we're going to continue seeing the impacts that are already part of the system, and that could become even worse. So what are some of the ideas? What can national banks do? But also, what role then can your bank or can the BNDES do, given the fact that it has such an important impact in Brazil, in order to help increase the regional impact going beyond the borders from Brazil? Yes, thank you so much. That's a very stimulating discussion. In fact, the neoliberal project tried to decrease or even destroy national banks. That's a part of this reality, but those that have survived is because they have been resilient. National banks do hold a lot of patience and they have long-term views, and the BNDES has credit lines for over 35 years. No private bank has these kind of credit lines with a 35-year horizon. Also, the air industry, which is highly competitive and which is going through an important situation, well, the BNDES was funded 1,490 planes, which, I mean, never an air industry would not have been able to have this kind of development without having a national bank providing this kind of effort. Over 3,000 efforts. Also, the cellulose industry, where we are highly competitive. From the onset, the funding for eucalyptus and for pines, which were not known back in the past because there was no research developed, was funded by the BNDES. All of the hydroelectrical power generation plants have been founded 92% by the BNDES. Over 70% of solar and wind energy has been funded by us. We've been able to increase wind energy, and we're also focusing on that with the PV plants in Brazil and in the region, promoting growth using public accounts for this. And sure, after the 2008 crisis, the bank has decreased in size, and now it has grown, and now we want to double its size in order to go back to what we had in the past in 4 more years. That's what we're after. Yet, public banks then do not have to work where private banks play an important role. I mean, we can fund with letters of credit certain investments. This is important to continue happening, strengthening the capital markets. But we've had important frauds. We have an important network of stores where we saw important frauds there, and investments decreased. And then the BNDES bank came in, making important investments with our capital, and we have increased the emissions. But the share market needs to increase, and we have to call also private banks to join us in this effort. So together we have to face this with long-term innovation, thinking about the future. And that's why it is so difficult. We have proposed to move forward in green economy in a partnership with the IDB. We have created this green partnership, and we're putting together other instruments together with the CAF and with the World Bank, so that together these multilateral banks and national banks can work. We know that we have 19 banks in the Amazonic Commission, and we can bring our efforts together. In fact, ECLAC could call for a summit with the leaders of multilateral and public banks in order to put together a strategy, in order to promote these kind of initiatives. Public banks can get resources and bring them into the market. Now we're going to be issuing green sustainable bonds, and we expect to be able to raise $2 billion in this month, in September. And the Ministry of Finance is going to manage these resources so that we can have a competitive interest rate for climate transition projects. This is a mechanism that has a high international market liquidity, and we can public banks don't normally do this. They simply provide a service. And we can do this. We can walk hand in hand with the projects. Also, taxonomy is something that calls our attention too. It's an interesting topic that has to do with the carbon markets and the regulation of this market. Latin America has many interests that are different to that of other regions. And there is a strategy here that we must prepare for in order to become certifying agencies. We have agencies that have regional commitments that came up thanks to our experience and our concerns. And I'm very optimistic in what I see, the direction that multilateral banks are taking in the region. And currently, we have a good connections. We have good connections in order to promote and to strengthen the different partnerships between public banks and multilateral banks with a focus on ecological resources. Now, savings is not what determines investment. It's the other way around. Good projects will allow us to have funds. There is liquidity, and there are ways to fund the market, especially if this is coordinated by public banks. But we require good projects: lithium, green hydrogen, wind energy, solar energy, e-mobility. We need more regional collaboration. We could come to Chile, for example, through LATAM, which in the past was, a Brazilian airline that merged with LAN. It's wonderful to have these companies. We must come together, and public banks can make an important contribution. But we must not only think about integration, forgetting companies, because we should have companies being a part of this productive structure, having a dialogue and having this public and private relationship.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Now, this Green Coalition with other banks is very good news. There are many powerful things that could be done. And it's excellent news to hear the BNDES, with such a powerful bank with so much experience, does have this dimension and the strategy for work at regional level. And so we are going to accept the challenge. But in the hand of DNS, it's going to be much easier to convene the development banking in terms of the comparative advantages of ECLAC, which is to serve as a bridge in that discussion, because here part of, a big barrier is how to convert the documents, policy intentions into concrete investment projects. And so our proximity with so many ministers and authorities in many areas, this facilitates the identification of projects and even moving ahead in some pre-feasibility so that it is easier for the development banking together with the private sector to continue with the next stages, far more detailed. So thank you very much, Mr. Mercadante, for your this challenge that undoubtedly we're going to talk about within the context of our working groups. And well, the second question I had was a variant of this. You mentioned the relevance of mobilizing private sector resources. We know that there are many resources there that if they do not have incentive and concrete mechanisms, this is a saving that never moves on to a positive investment. And so the question is, how could it be? What mechanisms could the development banking use to mobilize more private sector resources? You mentioned some green bonds, the emissions, the competitive interest rate, the green taxonomies, the issue of the certifications. All of that is part of the answer, yes. But could you elaborate a bit further and do share with us the experience of the BNDES? What things could be done more of, because they are a good practice, and what new things is not being done sufficiently in terms of mobilizing private sector resources? Well, in the bank, we have an area, the capitals market. The great strength of a bank are the lines of credit. We have lines of credit differentiated for small, medium, and small, and medium enterprises. They ensure up to 80% of the operation or the transaction for the private sector. And with this, we enhance private loans. And the role of the public bank is to reduce the risk, the aversion to risk. So today we have an employment rate of 0.1%. The bank is prudent and consistent. They have 2,400 servers that are competing, but it is a very prudent area. So this is the time to mobilize the capital and to define specific policies to reduce the risk for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. We have a loan system that is subsidized for technological innovation. And innovation means risk. Businessmen, when they innovate, they do not know if they're going to get to the product and process that they want. Maybe they don't get there. And if there is no subsidy, there will be no innovation. And so contemporary economy, the 4.0 industry, means innovation. You need to know how to do more at lower cost and quicker and better than the competition. This line is of $1 million. But yes, and why is it so because the private sector could finance industrial innovation projects at a much lower rate in order to encourage investment in innovation. We have a capitals market area, an equity, and we are partners, and we come in with capital for investments in strategic enterprises. And this very often is what makes the investment possible. And another instrument is issuing bonds. And the various securities, we have several investment funds that we could define their focus. For example, one fund for the recovery of forests. They at the very most 5%. But since the bank is very thorough and applied, the name of the BNDES does attract a lot of private investment. And that is what we're interested in, having the seed capital, and we have incubators, SMEs, and all of these are small projects, but we do help promote the fact that they can invest in these areas. And we're also defending a subsidized development fund. It must still be passed in Congress, but there is space for this. This is a way of launching securities in the market and having the bank helping out. But everyone needs to chip in. We cannot just have loans. And we need subsidies in these budgets. We need to capture resources in the market. Loans, equity. Loans are the going steady, so to speak. And the others are the marriage. We need to channel this, and it is a constant challenge by a public bank. There is space to do more. There is a lot of liquidity. We need to capture new projects. And so it is essential to capture these new projects and support them. The bank has an ample portfolio and has been very successful in these innovation projects. And so you mentioned the strong industrial policies made by Europe and the US, and that clearly show that that is not necessarily with a deluge of subsidies, but yes, that productive development policies with sectoral wages or focuses, as you said, is the way ahead. How do you see the challenges, and what advice would you have for other countries based on the very relevant experience in Brazil in terms of better aligning productive development policies and focuses on dynamizing areas and align them a bit better with the available financing. Because part of what happens is that generating financing projects by the private commercial banking, they use other criteria. And if it is viable to finance a real estate boom, well, that's different. But how to bring the banking to finance these other focuses that have a different aim, that create jobs and that would like to accelerate technological innovation and others. Well, we feel that this is very interesting. Saying that the economic reforms, such as in the US, can no longer be done thinking only of the financial system. These must be done by the productive sector, the factory, the value chains, the most important ones in the economy. And I believe that this is a major challenge. And that bridge between the liquidity of the financial system and the investment project in the industry, the future, public banks do have a decisive role to play. In Brazil, we're very competitive. We're the major beef and poultry producer, a second in pork, and then also maize and orange juice and so on. But this competitiveness has to do with our financing policy, which is very different. 20% of the agriculture is today with the BNDES. We have credit lines to buy machinery and equipment in order to encourage innovation in agriculture, especially low carbon agriculture, and another one for family agriculture, family farming. We have industrial agribusiness and we have family farming, and we need to create jobs and revenues in these other sectors, and they're still part of the challenge. And the idea is to design loans, not subsidized, but directed, focused. And among these focused loans, we could have some subsidized segments, which could be agriculture or the low income real estate. And I would say the ecological fund, the famous climate fund that we're creating, to have subsidies. The Ministry of Finance, the Treasury is going to subsidize all this. And the banks in the region, I think that they could make better use of making loans to BNDES. But we have $6.4 billion in agreements that we could do with BRICS and the China Development Banks, the IDB, the World Bank, well, so many banks. The German FW. But what is the problem with the financing? Well, the risk changes. You cannot transfer the risk of a small or medium-sized company. Any variation in the economy affects them. So what we're doing is we're financing the exporting sector, which is strong. And so all sectors that work in dollars, we open up this line for them. The BNDES offers a line with an interest rate that is fixed 5.5% at 12 years, exchange indexed. And so this for agriculture is very much used for exports. And so you also do this with development banking, not only to work on these special lines. Now, you must be creative, of course, with innovation and adapt the credit lines to the instruments that you want to further. Now creating an integrated system for industrial development. Different banks have reimbursable and non-reimbursable resources, and we need to combine things. And as I said in my presentation, I would like to forget some things, yes, but this semester we had the higher interest rate in the world. Real rate. Our inflation is less than in the US, and we have the fifth best fiscal result with a record trade commercial surplus. And so we're the country rating, and the interest rate has come down. Brazil declared their independence of the central bank, and this was quite complex, but happily the interest rate began to drop. And this greatly helps to encourage investment because it was very heavy going. And that is why it is so important to look for alternative lines and maintain the line of higher interest rates, which is very important to stimulate investment and innovation. There is still a lot of space, activities by public banks, working with the private banks. And well, one last example. BNDES is 71 years old, but and it came from the Federation of Private Banks in Brazil, is 75 years old. And BNDES was never part of it. But now, yes, we're a member. But I never thought I would do it, but there I am, a partner. And it is important because you begin to talk to the private banks, and so you begin to create partnerships and shape alliances and find pathways. And it is very important to close the distance with the public and private sectors, because the state has a decisive role to play in the loans. It's not the public bank. The relative weight, or our relative weight, is small. The capacity of encouraging what is a priority in terms of the government policy is precisely that. Industrial programs to speed up growth, ecological transformation, all of these things directs the efforts made by banks with the different partnerships that can be created.
Well, thank you so much. We have several questions from the audience. There is one on a topic that is sometimes controversial, and it says, and it's anonymous. Could you please tell us about the funding for new projects for the extraction of ores, minerals, and also oil? And how is that related to the energy transition, both in your country and also in the region? I think that this is basically based on the discussion that we currently or regularly have at ECLAC, because on the one hand, we really want to fast track the renewable resources and matrix, but reality is that we still depend on the fossil fuels. So we have projects being funded, as we say on the direct foreign investment reports. The flow of direct foreign investment for oil projects still tend to be huge. So I think that's what the question is aiming at, the funding of oil and minerals projects. That is an excellent question, really. It really is. On the first hand, the first thing that we need to face is we are going through an energy transition process. It's not simply replacing. It's a historical process. Remember that the fossil fuel industry has been around for more than 100 years. So we are 80 million new vehicles, and 10 million of those are with alternative energies, and the rest are still using fossil fuels. So this is a process. When someone buys an e-car, they do not get rid of the old car. They sell it, and that car still is driving around the city. Some countries are moving faster than others, but most of the transportation, public transportation, is based on diesel. We've launched a fleet of buses that decreases the emissions of particles or particulate matter but it's 20% more expensive. So it is important for us to fund these type of buses and trucks. And there are other industries that also depend on oil. And it would be naive for us to think that we could simply do away with oil currently. We cannot do that. Let's take a look at a simple example. OPEP has decreased the production, and we've had an inflection, interest rates have changed, and governments have to find a response to these situations. So, oil. What we want is to help us to accelerate the energy transition. Oil companies must be companies that promote renewable energies. Petrobras, for example, they have got to come in with green hydrogen. They must also have offshore wind energy being offered. Since our oil extraction is usually done offshore, then they could use that. They produce oil there, and it's a lot more complicated to bring this energy to the land. And there are experiences, but we cannot simply do away with oil. We still depend on the exports of derivatives from oil. For example, some of that fuel is also used for renewable energies. Norway has a sovereign fund, and they are important oil producers, by the way, but they make the largest contribution for the Amazon fund, which is a non-refundable one. And carbon sequestration will also put pressure on the oil industry. Our bank has a group that tries to fund the energy transition of Petrobras. So it was a very complex question, but still, nonetheless, I like to talk about these things transparently, not trying to fix things with euphemisms as politicians do. And in Brazil, Pre-Sal was a big, important oil reservoir. And back then, I was a senator. I was one of the leaders also in the government. And this is, I was simply like a bullseye, always people shooting at me. And it is the government that needs to respond to these attacks. There was one group that was saying that the production of oil was going to contaminate the beaches in Rio and to destroy the tourism industry. And I was trying to explain that not even if you used binoculars or even a telescope, you could see the offshore platform. And that was so. And there is a lot of inspection and surveillance. But what would Brazil be without Pre-Sal? Well, we have important, huge energy demand, and without Pre-Sal, we would not have the progress that we currently have, and there would be an important crisis that we would be undergoing. So, some of the countries, the neighboring countries in the region. So, again, we are not simply replacing energy; we are undergoing an energy transition. Guyana, for example, has the second largest oil reservoir in the region, and it's producing 340,000, and it's going to reach 1.7 million, which is a huge leap for a small country with important revenues that are increasing, but they want to protect the Amazon. They have necessary resources, so they're not going to be depleting the Amazon. They're actually going to replant. Colombia has important gas reservoirs, which was discovered by Petrobras, and we have an important energy frontier ahead of us. So we have to discuss safe production. Petrobras already has 3,000 exploration holes without one single accident. We also need to fund the reforestation of the Amazon, but unfortunately, so far, We've not been able to do away with these energy sources. We need to replace them eventually, but we cannot simply sit and wait for that replacement because the country, the planet really cannot wait. We have to come up with creative and brave responses for the regeneration of the Amazon. And we're working on that. Because tropical forests play an important role. These can be funded. There is a climate fund, for example, which is subsidized by oil, by the oil industry in order to fund the energy transition. And one big example is the one that I have mentioned of Norway. We have to be pragmatic. We must not be naive. We cannot simply do away with oil. It's going to take time. It's going to take time to achieve that. In COP28, we will be with the important oil producers. Oil has to go through the energy transition process also, and we must try and accelerate this so that we can truly address climate change. Well, thank you for such a well put together and pragmatic answer. It's the only way that a bank like the BNDES can. But anyway, there are other two questions that are more geoeconomic and geopolitical focused, and I'll try to summarize them in one single question. How do you see, what is your view regarding of the composition of the new BRICS, knowing that there is a BRICS group with a larger membership also, but also the new development bank? What role does that play in multilateralism and the role of Brazil, which is the stage is coming? Brazil chairing the G20 and playing an important role in these groups and the BRICS. Well, first of all, this is a great instrument in order to strengthen the South. Diplomatic relations cannot simply be between the North and the South. We must not only, let's take a look at the European Union and all of the progresses that they have made, or even look at the United States. We cannot freeze. There's a dispute with China also because it invests a lot in our region. And we have to now start looking at the South-South relationship, the BRICS. And in BRICS, we do have an agreement for exchange reserves, which means that countries that have exchange problems can take something out of that, which is almost like an insurance against these exchange prices. So if we expand it, we can increase this security because the BRICS bank can only fund the BRICS country. And to fund other countries, an important engineering must be put together. But we can still improve our help, the help for funding growth. The Saudi Arabia or the Emirates also have important funds. Let's take a look at the region. Argentina going through an important inflation, through crisis, going through a political transition. We have to take a look at what's going to happen in the elections there to see what's actually going to happen. I would like to, I'm a very dear friend of Alberto Fernandez, and I wish his government the very best, but it's very difficult for a public for a public bank of ours to fund a country undergoing the exchange situation that Argentina is going through. In the case of BNDES, the rate is 0.3, because there has always got to be a certain a kind of security threshold, and sometimes countries do not offer that. But BRIC banks could do this. They could offer these both for Argentina, but also for other countries in the region. And I would think that the strongest BRICS bank would have a more possibilities for providing funding, and in order to promote the energy transition and stability in the region. The increase of the BRICS gives the South more strength. 45% of the oil reserves are BRICS, and they are stronger than some G7 countries. So I think that it's very, very important. After the 2008 crisis, the BRICS really helped in order to improve the funding of the IMF, which in the past was simply unthinkable. South Africa and some of the other BRIC countries have also contributed. So that is a diplomatic approach. We must integrate Latin America. It's simply a must. Imagine the European Union divided. What would be the real diplomatic and economic and political strength that they would have? How could they integrate a productive chain? Some countries have moved away, but now many countries are really feeling sorry for having moved away from the European Union. It's a continent that has gone through two different wars, and now they're undergoing a new war. But it's a region that was integrated with one currency, with multilateral relationships, with one parliament. That is a great experience for us in Latin America to take a look at. We don't have the same kind of GDP. Everything tends to be more complicated here. We require more politics and more willingness, but it's an important topic and an important agenda. BRICS are very important in the regional integration, which is a must. And ECLAC can help us a lot in this. So I would like to suggest that ECLAC can invite former President Dilma Rousseff to tell us what's going on, how to increase credits in the region, for example, because maybe that's a problem for the BRICS countries, but the banks at the BRICS should be opening funding with local currencies, which solves the main problem of a public bank. Because funding puts the exchange rate at a risk. So with this kind of solution, credits can flow under better conditions and more competitively.
Suena estupenda.
Thank you very much. That sounds great. There is a question with a shade here that's very interesting by Marco Ginás, who is not here in person, but he is connected online. And he works at the Division of Productive Development. He said, Jake Sullivan spoke of an industrial policy that would benefit U.S. partners. Could it be expect an industrial policy of Brazil that benefits the rest of the region? Well, the truth is that they had a very good industrial policy to help countries, but that never happened. Supporting all countries, and this has not yet happened. One thing is to put the Marshall Plan in action when you had a role for the reconstruction of the European economy. The financing condition and all of that was decisive. And in that atmosphere, when ECLAC was born, it was an atmosphere that does not repeat the Versailles Treaty or the First War, and that led to no revenge. No, we need to overcome that. I hope that we're able to move ahead with technological partnerships. This is very important. The American economy, which is the most important one of all, does have a great presence in the region. But today, the fiscal effort that is being made seeks to restructure the American productive basis, and there's little presence in Latin America. And in Brazil, we're very interested in looking to establish these partnerships, alliances, as I said, because we need to have a coordinated policy for the region with regard to lithium, to have batteries, and to encourage the motor industry at a regional level, electric buses, and so on. This is an effort to integrate all this. And this has been hindered by the fact that Mercosur, that did have a significant relative advantage at one point, but ended with with Paraguay and energy and Itaipu there it is lower than in Brazil. And since Paraguay has access to the Brazilian market, it makes money in the markets. That is positive. We had a fund in Mercosur that was financed by the wealthiest in Brazil and Argentina, and it financed those who had a lower GDP per capita. For example, Paraguay, to offset the asymmetries. There was progress made significant in the sphere of Mercosur, and that I believe UNASUR, ECLAC could pick up on that. And a lot of work has been done there from that viewpoint to forge partnerships. And it is very important. I believe that today we should seek to establish these partnerships, green hydrogen, electromobility, and others help, and use the purchasing power in the region and the capacity to have partnerships, for example, with strategic metals in the region. That is essential in order to achieve this technological revolution that is occurring whilst we speak. We could be exporters. We cannot do it at 400 years after the independence. Well, when? And I think that we have every interest in looking for partnerships and building the industrializing process to integrate the region with other countries. Well, since it is now 10 to 1 and having almost 1 hour of Q&A plus the presentation, I would like a big round of applause for our speaker, Aloizio Mercadante.
Só dois comentários.
Just two final comments. We identify the seminar on Black empowerment and racial equality. UN does not have this. And so we would like to make a proposal to create a proposal for this, for racial equality. And I would like to send it to you because it is essential that this be within the ambitions. And you need to choose and say something important that I consider is a PowerPoint presentation. Instead of doing that, I decided to speak from my heart. But I will send you a text, nevertheless, which is creative including all the statements that I've made here spontaneously. So I will send a written text for others to read, and I will have the data there in order to strengthen it. But next time, if you like, I can have a PowerPoint, but I prefer to speak of things directly. I apologize, and thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. And yes, of course, the invitation is there. And with after the extraordinary presentation, the idea is to have a text, because the idea is to publish a book in about a year's time. So yes, thank you very much. And we're hoping to receive that. But maybe a final thought. Today, on account of the nature of this theme, financial, the issue of development banking, we've talked about financing, working with the private sector, of alignment with productive policies. But always recall that at ECLAC Latin America, all themes related to discrimination, inequality, exclusion, social exclusion, the data that we publish in our social outlook and so on are a tremendous challenge. And so all of these productive development policies and the intention to dynamize growth is not just for the fun of doing it, but it's because we want a fairer societies and have more inclusive societies and to have better jobs and how to finance the welfare states, be able to finance pension systems and social policy systems. I wanted to leave you with this because on account of the specialization of the themes, we sometimes focus on certain things, but the overall comprehensive approach is towards the other aspect. And that is why we have this phrase 75 and at ECLAC at its 75th anniversary, working for a more inclusive and sustainable future and covering all of the pillars that we would like to move ahead with. So I would also like to thank all colleagues from ECLAC who helped and were involved in organizing this cycle of conferences and worked on all these things. And also those who accompanied us online and in person. I remind you that we will continue to have these keynote presentations, and 1 or 2 a month until February 24, as you are all cordially invited to come or to connect. And I invite you to the program, to visit the program in the ECLAC website to check the date. September 28th, we will have the honor of hearing the keynote address by Ricardo Hausmann, professor at the John F. Kennedy School of Government and founder and director of Harvard's Growth Lab. And we look forward to seeing you again on that occasion. And then there will be others. I think it is clear today's conference shows us yet again that, well, on the one hand, the tremendous challenges that Latin America is facing, but I'm very satisfied of the partnership with BNDES. I think from the viewpoint of ECLAC, it is strategic for so many reasons, on account of being Brazil being the largest country in Latin America, population and everything, but also the intellectual leadership of Brazil. Many economists and political leaders are Brazilian. And this is something that at ECLAC, this is part of our mandate and our wish to maintain it. And the leadership that Brazil could have in so many areas for the entire region, it is very relevant to have a positioning of Latin America. And so at ECLAC, we are very interested in hearing about the collaboration and supporting Brazil in its internal challenges as well as its aspirations in terms of the multilateral system and the world economy. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, secretario ejecutivo.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. For those of you who are here in person, we invite you to enjoy a refreshment outside and also through social media. I say to you all, I bid you a very good afternoon and thank you.
Yo no voy a poner.